All right, good morning, folks. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful December morning. Happy holidays. Yeah, as I said earlier, we've got some construction going on in the department, so we're hoping everything will be maintained and we won't lose any of our logistics. But we're going to go ahead and run through, and the show will continue. So, just a moment, and we'll get things moving here, folks. All right, fantastic. We are too far back here. Get a quick preview of what we're going to go through today. All right. So thank you for joining us, everybody. We've got a pretty good action-packed setup for you here on our agenda for December. As usual, we start out with our celebrations, our congratulations, and our shout-outs. And we also, thank you for that. We are recording on this one. We also have a recap of November spreadsheets that we were looking at. We've got a quick look at the data acquisition calendar. And then we look at some upcoming grant opportunities, which are ending here in just this week before looking at some hot topics and news legislation, specifically some pretty important state and federal updates before we dive into some allowability through Austin and Michelle. Some shout outs. We have two folks who've joined the department I wanted to highlight. One is our dispute resolution specialist, Jeff Brandt, and then also very excited to welcome Amber Worthington to the budget team. She was previously working with our public school finance, but has since taken a promotion to work on our team now. So we're very excited to have her on board. And then another thing, we tend to be, I think, maybe a little tough on our friends over in DC, but Congress did pass the Secure Rural Schools Program funding bill, which did increase the amount of funding that will be going to rural districts and counties. So that is a really big win for folks. I'm very excited to see that coming in as we had a pretty significant, about 65% decrease when that original appropriation went down and reverted to the prior formula. Real quick, recapping some of the items we went over last month. The first one was looking at the financial transparency template. One of the bills that was brought out in 2024 was 718, which would have added quite a few items to the requirements for what's in your annual budget. So, we're working on adjusting that financial transparency form. We have had a lot of great feedback in the last month, and we were looking at kind of updating and creating a version 2 of that. So, we'll have some more information to come in that one. We're still waiting, kind of looking through some of the feedback that we've gotten, trying to adjust it to make it a better template for folks. I do see there's some items in the chat. I'm going to look at those really quickly here. Looks like mostly AI for the moment. Yep. Gotta love being able to take some notes via AI. Next, we had some transportation items that Zane Cliver went over. We had some updates to legislation did pass last session, one of which was a removal of that $7.5 million discretionary adjustment, which removed $7.5 million out of the claim reimbursements. That will be removed. So starting next year, you'll see that increase flow back into the coffers. Another item that was very large was the authorized vehicles. So these are vehicles that are not your traditional yellow buses. Those are available to be used at this point, but again, you're not going to be reimbursed for those current year expenditures until next year, since all of those reimbursements are in arrears by 1 year. So there are some required items for that, similar to what we see with other reimbursements for your transportation mileage. As part of that, to kind of help with some of that tracking, the department has developed an optional mileage summary template that can help show some of those required details. There are many ways to slice this. Some of you may already have some software that helps you track these things, or you may have a vendor that provides those kinds of information, but we thought it'd be helpful to be able to provide something like that. So again, these authorized vehicles are reimbursable for your to from school trips, any of your instructional or interday shuttles that are going for curricular items between buildings to a CTE shop, what have you, and then any of those reimbursable field trips. And those kind of reimbursement items are mirroring what you'd see for a traditional school bus. Again, still not able to reimburse for athletic activities, those non-reimbursable field trips, or anything that's non-curriculum based. So we will be providing an in lieu, or excuse me, a reimbursement that's very similar to the in lieu, in which we're giving a mileage rate. And so far for 25, 26, pending any sort of changes on the federal mileage rate, that'll be 91 cents a mile that will be reimbursed. So we still have to have that documentation that includes the vehicle numbers or what's assigned to that vehicle, including their VINs, and then especially their beginning and ending odometer readings, so that we can kind of track how many miles have been done on this. So next, what is on your radar? So we want to look at our data acquisition calendar. There's quite a bit of IC data coming in. So there's your December item is coming up at the end of the week here. And then also McKinney-Vento data is coming in as well. At the end of the month, we also have some federal and state consolidated plan revisions that we need to have coming through to going to Austin. Then looking at January, there are quite a few items coming in January as well. Specifically wanted to highlight that your final application and budgets for IDEA Part B and your preschool funds for your new charter schools are going to be due on the 26th. And then also at the end of the month, your IC financial transparency information is due over to the folks at the board. Next, some housekeeping. So we have two, if you've got some time here this week, two items that are coming in from our friends over in the child nutrition side. Your technology innovation or TIG grants, as well as your Idaho Crunch Day items are due at the end of the week. So please try to get those in if you haven't yet. Those are some fun programs to be able to apply for there. Next, I'm going to turn it on over to Lisa for a moment.
Right. Hey, guys. Want to make sure I thank everybody today that has done their IDEA application. I know that's a lot of work. Wanted to let you know if you were going to be peeking at it at any time in the next several weeks, it's going to be updated into the new format, which is switching to a drop-down menu. It eliminates the side menu piece that, so it will have a no look, and we will go over that in the spring with a webinar. I want to also put a reminder out to please make sure you've updated your chart of accounts labels from Title 6B to IDEA Part B. This aligns with the naming convention of the actual program at the federal level, and then also with our chart of accounts expectations here at the state. If you need any assistance finishing up anything in your application or otherwise, please reach out. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. All right, next we've got some very much breaking news. One is that there will be an update in our FY27 budget request. As the budget revenue side is looking rather bleak still, the superintendent's looking to readjust our budget. One of the big ones is going to be aligning the support units. So when we submitted our budget back at the end of August, before we really had good data coming in, we expected there to be 160 support unit increase statewide. Really, when we're looking at the enrollment data that's been sent to us, that is not materializing. So we're looking to effectively keep that flat. So that will decrease some of the statutory increases that would have come with all of those support unit increases. So that will be reduced to kind of effectively current enrollment levels as we're seeing that stay flat for these last 2 years. Another item that got pulled back is the removal of the 50 million SPED block grants. We put a lot of work into that. We're really excited about that program. It's still something we're looking to pursue, but given the revenue projections, we don't believe that that is something that's going to actually be able to come to fruition this year. Still a very high priority for the superintendent, and we're looking at finding other ways to try to get something jump-started, specifically either jump-starting a high-need student fund again, as we tried to propose last year that got shot down in the Senate, or creating some sort of regional service center model to allow some shared services between LEAs. We're looking to kind of take some of our dedicated funds that we have that have been for other uses, such as the Career Ready Students grants that we have and our driving trainings account. We're identifying a few $1 million in each of those spots that we might be able to funnel into a new model, whether that's using a combination of the high need student funds or those regional service centers. And more information will become as we're working with the governor's office and the legislature on trying to find what is going to be the best path forward, recognizing that money is not growing on trees for any of us at this point. So pretty large development there, and we're looking forward to finding a good path forward, recognizing that we are still having some revenue shortfalls. That's what next I want to check this over to Austin to give us an update on the community school grants.
So earlier this week, you all may have seen a headline or some announcements or some emails about the cancellation or potential cancellation about full service community school grants. United Way themselves found out late last week. We found out early this week that the Department of Education was trying to cancel full service community school grants on the grounds of them being DEI and not in alignment with the current administration's policies. But in this announcement, they made it clear that grant recipients were able to appeal this decision during the week immediately following the announcement. And in the past day or so, Superintendent Critchfield, with backing of the governor's office and many of you school districts, have submitted an appeal on behalf of Idaho. The state of Idaho is fighting for this. Given that the grant itself had some requirements in place during the Biden administration to incorporate certain elements that have not seen super heavy programmatic influence in the actual implementation of these programs on the ground. Folks here at the State Department generally believe that the appeal has a very strong chance of overturning the decision, but at this point, we're still waiting for an update on that front. So Critchfield's fighting for this one. The governor's office is fighting for this one. State Department's fighting for this one. So we hope to have this one reversed shortly. And while we're on the topic of federal grant updates, we kind of have seen more headlines in the past few weeks about interagency agreements. Just a quick follow-up on that slide from 2 months ago. Interagency agreements are still pending. There is some additional planning going on, but nothing has been finalized just yet. So still waiting for an update there. We don't know what direction that's going to be just yet. But yeah, thank you, folks.
Thanks, Austin. And we're going to turn it right back to Austin and Michelle. They're going to do the PD and 30 on what is allowability.
Thank you, folks. I'm joined today by the new and shining Title 1A coordinator, Michelle Pereira, joining me in my office because our office is currently being demolished around us, and we're doing our best to keep things nice and controlled. So if you hear some construction noise in the background while we're doing this, we apologize in advance, but it'll keep us interesting for you. So, see if I can't get the slides to progress. All right. So for those of you who were at our CFSGA workshop tour, or our directors conference rather, this will be a familiar slide deck, but it's worth the reminder for those that were there. For those that were not there, this is a great fundamentals, a fantastic overview of the fundamentals of what is allowable. For those of you that have struggled or had challenges having something approved in the CFSGA or approved in the GRA, this will be your toolkit to get that handled here in the future. The individual slide deck that we're presenting today is available if you send me an email. The full slide deck for the full communities of practice and the recording will be available in the usual places shortly thereafter. But if you like the slide deck immediately, feel free to email me, kohout@sde.idaho.gov for a copy of these slides. So the plan for today, we're going to roll through what are the fundamentals of allowability. What are we talking about? What's the discussion? What's the conversation to be had about what is allowable, what isn't allowable? Why can't we have a firm decision universally across the board? We're also going to bring it back one slide, maybe. There we go. We're also going to have a brief discussion about the universally unallowable costs. We'll roll through what the touch points are. How do we communicate with each other? How does the LEAs communicate with the SDE? How do we communicate with you guys? And what are the natures of that communication that kind of reframe what we're trying to express? We're going to roll through some best practices, and then finally we're going to do some worked examples together. The worked example section won't be quite as interactive as it was at the directors conference, but we'll do our best to keep you guys involved in the discussion as much as we possibly can. So first and foremost, what questions are we asking when we're talking about what is and isn't allowable, and for each individual grant we're talking about? So the broad principles of allowability are described in 2 CFR 200 in the 400 series. So it could be 402, 403, 404, and through the first 20 citations of 2 CFR 400. So in that section for you. The first principle we're talking about is the item reasonable? Absent any error, absent exigent circumstances, would somebody else in a similar position with similar amounts of funding, with the similar needs and wants in front of them, would they make a similar decision? Would you guys would somebody in a similar position spend the same amount of money with the same knowledge and connections? Would somebody else make the same decision? This is a consistently relative conversation. There's many circumstances that can go into this, but it's a universal smell test. If we on our end can tell that maybe you're spending more than you probably ought to, or there's a possibility that you may be spending more than you ought to, or we're being, more expensive or more accommodating than we ought to be, that's where this conversation kind of comes up. My mind goes to, oh, a homeless student needs a backpack. We can go buy a backpack for $30, $40. Why are we seeing a reimbursement claim for Louis Vuitton bags for these homeless students? Like, where's the reasonability there? And I'm going to lean on Michelle a couple times and for half this presentation, but the first time, I'm going to pass it off to her for a second just to kind of speak about some of the interesting examples we've seen in terms of reasonability for like parent engagement meals or student or student equipment, that sort of thing. Anything come immediately to mind for you?
Yeah, so an example for that relates to parent-family engagement is if you're spending $1,300 to provide a light refreshment for 50 parents, then that doesn't quite fit the smell test and it doesn't seem reasonable. And it doesn't seem like it's a light refreshment anymore. So that would be the reasonable factor. It's also the prudent person test. Would someone who has a prudent nature spend the same amount of money, follow the same procurement procedures in order to get those items?
Like, they're just going to lean into your internal controls about like your conflict of interest for procurement too. If somebody else in the same position doesn't know your buddy Tony that can give you a really good deal, or you can pass money off into his pocket for something on. With the overabundance of ribs and salmon and seafood in front of them. So that sort of thing. And the next one that kind of ties into it's going to be the reasonability test once I can get the slide to swap over. So
You want your Wi-Fi? Can you check your Wi-Fi?
We did go out. Yes,
Does it say you're on guest or in the
I'm
you?
not in guest at all.
Don't be on guest, it would be in the.
I think it was only the birthday.
Let me see.
We're
Hey, Austin, I can still hear you and see you now.
Okay, we can hear us. All right, are we back? What was the last thing that went through, Lisa? Oh, looks like Rob's gone too. We lost the slide deck.
Hang on, everybody, while we pull that back up. Austin, do you have it?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Somebody's going to share it, right?
Yeah.
Yep, I got it. Never a dull moment, huh?
Thanks for your patience, everyone, as we navigate these construction times.
Yeah, no doubt. If you guys can hear drills or talking or anything like that. So,
There you go.
what was the last thing that went through in fear of ignoring an entire slide? All right. Absent that information, we'll go ahead and get started with necessary. So, in the part of conversation that kind of ties into whether or not it's reasonable, is it necessary? Is there a standing need in the district for an expense of this type? If we have 8 homeless students, why on earth are we buying 200 backpacks? Or if we don't have anybody here at the district that's trained how to use a 3D printer, why are we buying a 3D printer for curricular assistance if we don't have anybody trained to actually make use of it. That kind of conversation. And that's once again, a soft conversation, and we're forced to extrapolate based on the information that we have. So absent that information, it's rather challenging to tell. Michelle, do you have any easy examples that come to mind that raise questions of necessity?
Yeah, so the first example that I have is like a bounce house rental for parent engagement or for field day or something like that. It's not necessary to the grant, and it's not necessary to a parent and family engagement event to have a bounce house in order to disseminate the information that you're having that meeting for. Another example is if you buy supplies that aren't used to support the program or to effectively run the program. Like if you do buy a 3D printer, it needs to tie into the curriculum that you have in order to support that program. So is it needed to effectively run the program is the basis of this question.
Okay. And we can only work with the information we have to hand. Like the conversation we already brought up, like if nobody's there, or if we just see a 3D printer absent any sort of context or absent any extra information, what is the evidence that we have on our end to be able to certify and provide assurance to the folks that are overseeing us that this was necessary, that sort of thing. That third big component will be allocability or allocable. It is the item allocable. And I don't know about you guys, but the word allocable doesn't exactly come up in everyday conversation when I'm not at work. It's not exactly a common used phrase, but what we're talking about and what the law is talking about specifically is what is the relationship of the purchase or of the expense item or of the service being provided to the end goal of the grant. So how closely can we tie the funding that's being passed on to you with an improved outcome for a student or for a teacher or for a student in poverty or for a student's ability to access the curriculum in English? Like how closely can we associate that? And this kind of leans into the conversation about direct costs and indirect costs as well, where if I'm paying to have a paraprofessional stand in a classroom next to a student that's, still working on building their English fluency, and they're able to translate for the teacher, and they're able to offer the student access to the curriculum on hand and help them interact with their teacher better, that is a highly allocable expense for the purpose of Title III, for the purpose of Title I. You can see how those dollars are immediately impacting the outcomes for a student. If I'm talking about the allocability of a portion of a business manager's salary to manage the CFSGA, how can I track that $5,000 that we're paying the business manager extra to the increased performance of all of those students within that program? It's a bit more strenuous of a relationship, and you could argue that the money going towards the business manager is benefiting all students across all programs and not specifically the students within each individual program for EL or title. So that's kind of why some things are a little bit too broad to be considered allocable to a specific grant. If an expense benefits more than a couple of programs, we would expect that expense to be maybe spread across several programs, or only the portion that benefits a certain program is spent to the grant, that sort of thing. And the allocability conversation is shaped pretty thoroughly by the purpose of each individual grant. What is allocable to Title II may not be allocable to Title I-C at all. Or in some cases, you might have an expense that in your head would be great to put under 1A, but the way you're trying to do it or some of the details of how it's being implemented actually place it firmly under the purview of Title IV. And that's a conversation we can have with you as the pass-through agency. Our coordinators at the state level are generally experts in their subject, and sometimes they may be able to pass you off to another coordinator to say, hey, this is something kind of tenuous under my program, but Jill has an excellent idea of how you can do this under her program. So helping you match up what you're trying to do with the correct grant program is also an allocability question. Have you seen any kind of allocability conflicts come up in the GRA or the CFSGA so far?
So every once in a while, it will pop up where it seems like an expense will be a better fit under a different grant. So an example that we had fairly recently was a book study, and it was a book study for parents, but it was submitted under Title IIA. And usually under Title II-A, that's more focused on teacher professional development and increasing the capacity of your staff to help serve students, but it's not really for parent engagement thing. So it would actually be better under Title I-A. And so that was a pretty small item, but that's just an example to show how it's still allowable. It just is a better fit under a different grant.
And generally, if something can't be tied to a grant program very easily, like we have to sit there and lawyer our way through several extensions, like one of my favorite examples that hasn't happened, thankfully, and I'm hoping putting this into the universe doesn't give anybody any ideas, but, a hot tub in the teacher's lounge, how, oh yeah, that's an easily Title II allowable expense because it benefits the quality of our teachers, because they're so much more relaxed and healthy entering the classroom every single morning if they get to spend 5 minutes soaking in a hot tub. It's like, well, we can have a conversation about reasonable and necessary earlier. I mean, I'm sure to the teachers, it may be quite necessary to have a hot tub in the teacher's lounge. But in terms of allocability, it's not allocable to Title II quite cleanly because it doesn't immediately affect their ability to perform in the classroom. It's kind of a broad, overarching quality of life type improvement that benefits anybody else that accesses the hot tub. You can't isolate the hot tub to just instructional staff. Maybe the janitor wants to have a soak. Maybe somebody else wants to enjoy it, that sort of thing. So if more than the intended audience is able to benefit from it, that kind of raises the immediate allocability question. So as tighter and as more closely as you can associate your expenses with a specific grant program, the easier time you're going to have identifying allocability for allowability for the GRA as well as the CFSGA. So the last element here is supplemental, and this is kind of bringing in the requirement for all ESEA grants in some form or another that expenses must be supplemental to the existing district programs and not not supplanting an existing responsibility or an existing capacity of the district. The envisioning of ESEA is that any of the funding that's provided is kind of like an extra layer on the cake that is your district. It's an additional capacity above and beyond what is possible given your ordinary level of state funding. And it is generally accommodating if state funding does fluctuate. If it goes down, you can add to that top layer, but beneath that top layer has to be a functional district. So if you've got civil rights requirements, if you've got testing requirements, anything that's in state code, can't be in that top layer, because if that top layer gets lifted off, you still have to have a functional and a civil rights compliant district. Another element of that in a lot of programs is whether or not an individual expense within that top layer has been previously supported with state and local funding. Like you can't say, oh, well, we've had 8 teachers in this building for 15 years. We're going to reduce that to 6 without any changes in our support units or any changes in our funding. We're going to reduce the number of teachers in that building, the general funding back down to 6, and then we're going to cover that the remaining 2 with a federal funding. It's like that's supplanting. We can't just move stuff out of what we've already done into federal funding. Most of what I've seen on this front is stuff interacting with WIDA testing, for example, where test proctoring can't be done with federal funding. But Lord knows there's some other fun examples in there. Michelle, what else have you seen?
Yeah, so under Title II-A, it's actually unallowable to be reimbursed for fingerprinting and background checks because those are a required part of receiving a certification. It's a state requirement to have those tests run. So we cannot reimburse the fees for the fingerprinting and background costs or background check costs. Another one that is specific to Title II-A is dyslexia training, specifically the training that's required in order to get a certification in the state of Idaho. If it's required in order to receive that certification, then it is not allowable to be reimbursed with Title II-A funds. Those should be supplemental above and beyond. And then an example under Title IV mostly is nurses. So nurses, the only way that they would be allowable is if the work that they're doing is not a medical service, but it's teaching something, like teaching something in addition to their regular work. So if they're providing medical services or they're just there as part of their day and they're not actively doing something besides that, then it would not be allowable.
And this one may be this sort of requirement is kind of consistently shifting with different requirements of the state or with the federal level. Like several years ago, a dyslexia training became a requirement, and after that point, a training your teachers to meet that dyslexia requirement no longer was allowable under Title II because the state was requiring it after that point. So it is kind of constantly shifting as requirements shift, which kind of makes it a bit of a moving target. But generally speaking, if you're building new capacity on top of what's existing within the district, you can kind of stay away from that sort of interaction. So the last section before I pass it to Michelle to take the lead for a bit is some of the universally unallowable costs that exist within the universal grant guidance as well as in ESEA. So one of my favorite citations within universal grant guidance, and by favorite I mean humorous, and not favorite as in what I am glad we can't do, because sometimes it might be needed given some of the events at the federal level. Unfortunately, the cost of alcoholic beverages is unallowable. That's the complete citation in universal grant guidance. I've never seen a more succinct federal law, but I suppose they decided fun was not allowed in education. But beyond that, you may not use federal funding universally to cover any bad debts. You may not use federal funding for any goods or services for personal use. This is the requirement that pretty thoroughly covers a t-shirt in most cases. You can't buy like a school swag with your federal dollars. You can't buy a t-shirt that says I survived the unnamed pandemic or anything like that, just because it's a personal benefit and something that's personally usable. This is also a requirement that hits if you buy a 3D printer that nobody at the district I can actually use. It kind of like, well, is this being bought for somebody's use at home and they're just going to bill it to the district instead? That sort of thing. And this one in particular has some caveats because in some cases you can buy T-shirts for your migrant staff to go out into the community so that they have a T-shirt that very clearly says that they are a member of your district and they're representing your district to help recruit students. One last one that is universally unallowable will be lobbying expenses. You cannot pay your congressman, and you cannot, lobby with any federal dollars. You can't use their money against them, whatever you want to think of it as, but lobbying is universally unallowable. There's also a couple of items specific to ESEA that would kind of derail the conversation, but if you want to review ESEA section 8526, there's another few things that are a little distinctive, but you may not fund that sort of education with federal funding. So that being said, I'll pass it off to Michelle to kind of walk us through what the allowability pipeline is.
So first we're going to start off with the CFSGA. So this is part of your program planning. This is your future outlook of what you're planning to do with the funds for the next school year. And it's also a place where you put revisions for what you actually did with the funds in the current school year if needed. So when you submit your CFSGA, the program coordinators for each grant will review it and make sure that everything in there is allowable and fits the purpose of the program. From there, they'll either approve it, like everything looks good, or they'll return it for some additional action needed, like adjust your staff or adjust this category, or tell me more about the supplies that you're purchasing. And then once it's approved, when it's approved by every program coordinator, then the funds will be uploaded into the GRA and you are okay to spend with approval and confidence in the items in your application. This is where I would say if it's not in your application, you need to reach out to us to see if it's allowable, because everything that is in the application, the CFSGA, is considered pre-approved and you have the authority to go ahead and spend those funds. So the next step in the process is expense reimbursement. So after your CFSGA is done, after your funds have been uploaded into the GRA, then you are able to draw down requests to be reimbursed for the funds that you've expended. And the GRA, or the grant reimbursement application, is where you're reimbursed for those items. The GRA is kind of our last check to make sure that everything that was purchased or the funds were expended on is allowable. And everything that is in the GRA should be listed in your approved CFSGA. So the GRA, it may be returned because something needs more information. It's not clear what the connection is between the CFSGA and what's in the GRA. Or if it's not in the CFSGA, it needs more information to determine if it's even allowable to be used with these funds before we even go back to the step of revising the CFSGA. So let's say you had the pleasure of receiving a message from me saying it was unallowable. Why was it unallowable? Where do we find this information? So if it's unallowable in the CFSGA in our first step of the process, it's because program coordinators that are reviewing it have looked at it and said, that doesn't meet the purpose of the program. That doesn't meet the intent of the law, and it's not reasonable. It's not allowable, or there's a condition where it's supplanting funds. So these 4 pillars of that cake that Austin was talking about, these are the 4 pillars of what our program coordinators look at when they look at the CFSGA. And if they say, oh, you can't do that, this is where they're coming from. If the cost, if a GRA request was returned and it was stated that it was unallowable, then the person reviewing the GRA request either doesn't have enough information to determine allowability or have a clear connection, or it's not in the CFSGA, so it's not a pre-approved cost item, or it doesn't meet the purpose of the program. It's just a flat blank, no, this doesn't meet the purpose of Title I-A, which is to serve at-risk learners and to help them reach the challenging state academic standards. So that is the lens, in addition to those 4 pillars of necessary, reasonable, allocable, and supplemental.
So that kind of broadly covers the harsh legal reality of what you guys are tasked with when it comes to filling out the CFSGA, and what we're tasked with as the pass-through agency to be able to help you guys certify that what you are doing is in compliance with the grant, and what isn't in compliance with the grant. But there's a very human side of this, and there's a reality to this whole conversation where the only touch point that we have with your programs, in a lot of cases, I mean, not all of us have the benefit of doing school visits, and not all of us have the opportunity to do school walkthroughs to actually see these programs on the ground. And even when we're doing monitoring, we might do a shadow of a classroom or a program or a family engagement event, but generally it's a very brief experience. You folks have the benefit of spending every day in your schools and seeing these programs, and you are teachers, and we know good and well you guys care about your students quite strongly. You're fighting to do everything you can for them, and sometimes the CFSGA gets seen as a burden. And I say sometimes, kind of as a joke, but it generally, you have this reality in one hand, and you're trying to get your funding to be able to help these kids on the other. On our end, all we can see of your programs most of the time is what's in black and white in that CFSGA or in that GRA. So if in your mind you know good and well this program meets the exact purpose of 1A, you can see the outcomes in play, you can see them smiling, you can see them succeeding, you can see the parents engaging, you can see the community coming together and serving this purpose of the grant and doing wonderful things. And this piece of paperwork, this homework on the back end is just kind of a burden on you. That you're like, why is this in the way? And on our end, we're over here fighting you because, hey, this program that you know good and well is phenomenal isn't allowable for some reason. The reality is all we have to work with is what makes it in the black and white. You're forced to take that entire reality that you're serving, all these kids, these smiling faces, these happy families, these families with needs, and you're trying to condense it down into a pinhole and put it through the CFSGA to help us understand what you're doing. So the more information you can give us, the more context, the more information, the more passion you can put into that CFSGA box, the better we can help you throughout the year. If something seems kind of like a weird edge case, let us know what the surrounding information is, and it can turn into a bit of a headache sometimes, but that helps us understand what's going on your end. If something hits the GRA by itself that just says salaries for classified staff, that doesn't tell us basically anything about what's going on in the building, and all we're stuck doing is kind of assuming, which we assume the best, but we also have to keep the practical side that an auditor on our end is monitoring us based on what's going on in that CFSGA alone. They don't get to see what's going on in the schools either. So that's kind of the framing bit of this next, like, that's the reality we're kind of stuck with. And that's why we generally ask for as much information in that CFSGA as we possibly can. Anything come to mind there?
No, this is a very good example because it's a GRA reviewer. We do see the black and the white, and we try to get as much information from the documentation and the notes field and the CFSGA to paint a picture, but sometimes it's not possible. And for perspective, just in the title programs alone, there's over 300 claims each month to go through. And that's, and special education has a very similar boat. And so we're trying to do our best to provide grace and perspective, but we do need a little assistance with a little more information at times to do that.
I had a rather visceral experience when I first started at the department here, because I joined right in the beginning of audit season. So I walked in, I sat down at my desk, and not a week later, I had an auditor walk into my desk, or walk into my office. They didn't physically impact the desk, but they walked into my office and asked me a bunch of questions about the GRA. I'm like, well, I've used the GRA before. Sure, that'd be fine. And she wants to look at GRA claims from 2 years ago. I'm like, okay, let's look at some GRA claims. And we open them up, and she has never worked in education before, never worked with the schools before, never worked in a building before. And this is her first year reviewing education department. And she's got the written standards in front of her of what is and isn't allowable. And I'm over here advocating for why GRA claims are allowable as well. And we're pulling up GRA claims from 2 years ago that I was never anywhere near. And I'm trying to articulate to her what's going on, but the written evidence in front of us just says a paras for student support. And I'm trying to sell a used car over here, trying to advocate for what was going on, because I know what happened in that building. I know what would happen. I know what 1A programs look like, but I don't have any evidence in front of me to fight for it. So, like, the more you can give us, the more we ask for, the better information we have to pass off to our auditors and to the reviewers at USED and be able to advocate for you. And the stark reality of, like, I know what a classroom program looks like. You know what a classroom program looks like. How do I have the evidence in front of us to be able to advocate for somebody else who walks in that doesn't know hide nor hair of what's going on the floor? So.
Yeah, so we'll just go through the next two slides pretty quick, but just paint us a picture in the GRA and the CFSGA, and we have those 4 pillars of the cake to determine allowability. And all of these are interconnected and have to be met to determine that allowability in the CFSGA and in the GRA. And so the goal of everything is to not make assumptions. The goal is that somebody without your background and somebody without our background can look at both the GRA and the CFSGA and come to the same assumptions. They can come to the same determination of allowability. And if, the CFSGA is public record, and so you want to make it as transparent as possible what you're doing with these funds. So details matter to us, they matter to auditors, for you, for us, and to USN.
And this becomes extremely important when it comes to like exigent circumstances or some extra details, because you can do some creative things with with this funding, but only if everybody involved is on the same page with what the extra steps are you have to cross to be able to get everything done. And without that extra context, something that looks unallowable may actually be allowable. Something that looks allowable may actually be unallowable. So to kind of illustrate that, well, I'm skipping ahead.
Yeah. So where do we get our answers when we give you an answer?
Where do we get answers? We ask her.
Obviously not. I can't even say it. But where we start first is we start at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That's like the top of our tier where we get our information, as amended by ESSA, of course. And then if it's written by people that like to be vague, so sometimes we don't find our answers there. And we go look at the Code of Federal Regulations, so that CFR, where we found the information regarding necessary, allocable, reasonable. And then sometimes that doesn't have enough information. So then we go to some non-regulatory guidance from USED or even programmatic support from USED. Now, obviously, these slides were written before the combustion of USED. So at this time, the top two are where we get our answers and we make determinations from, and from any updated non-regulatory guidance that's available.
Yep. And we're saying combustion of USED to be dramatic. There are still folks there that wear that name badge. Lord knows how many there are left, but they do still exist. There's some spread responsibilities out across a couple of agencies. So
yes.
Worst comes to worst, we could reach out to somebody and we'll probably get a response back within 6 to 9 business years. But they are still intact at this moment. So now we get to the part where we're going to help, as some worked examples and painting a picture of what this whole thing looks like. And my favorite example that we like to discuss, I actually told a bit of this story to a friend of mine that works as a trainer for a Title 1A compliance out in San Antonio. And she physically recoiled when I got to the first half of this story. But just for argument's sake, let's pretend that an LEA in their CFSGA just under supplies wrote bicycles for students under 1A. And, to help with the allocability question, we're going to include the purpose of 1A right there. We're providing all students significant opportunities to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. So how on earth would bicycles for students help close achievement gaps? That sounds like just a gift. It'd be a great Christmas. I mean, that sounds like a 90s Christmas movie right there. But like, how is that allocable to the grant? And given just that information, it's exceptionally difficult for us to say, oh yeah, absolutely, go ahead and spend that money without, facing consequences from USED when they come and monitor us and say, how did you know that this is allowable, given that it may not be allocable to the purpose of 1A? We don't know if it's reasonable, did they need bicycles? Is it necessary? Do they need this many bicycles? They're spending a couple grand on bicycles. That seems kind of odd. There's a lot of red flags that pop up with just that brief description. But in reality, the district that did this really went above and beyond in terms of providing as much evidence that they possibly could to demonstrate how and why this would be an allowable expense. What's up?
Next.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the director's conference, we opened this up to discussion, like, okay, what's the call here? But, given that it's a little more challenging in this format, we'll just roll forward. This was, in reality, really thoroughly covered by the district in question. So when they submitted this claim, they also included information supporting that these bikes would be purchased and then retained, inventoried, and owned by the district and will be checked out to students. The bicycles were going to be replacing an existing fleet of bicycles that they had already been using that were previously donated to somebody else. So this is not supplanting, because this was not previously purchased with district funding. This is a completely new thing that they're going to spend money on for the first time. And this purchase was in support of an existing program to fight an existing need. In essence, this is a relatively rural district, and the district was not quite large enough to have a bus fleet that could bring all of their students from alternative high school to their workforce education programs. Each of them had basically jobs in the community that they would do for credit, some in a welding shop, at an auto body, think CTE type of thing. And they had these programs, and all these students had to be there about the same time, and they couldn't get all these kids to their programs at the same time. So they had been donated a bicycle fleet, and the students were checking the bicycles out to go attend their work and then come back to the schools at the end of the day. And they could already demonstrate that this program had improved the academic success of the students that were affected. They had improved attendance. It had improved the number of different academic indicators for these kids, and they had also demonstrated that, and they had also included a copy of the agreement the students signed that says, "Hey, you must return this bicycle to us. That it is ours. Must be wearing a helmet while you operate it." Check it in by this time. Like, they had a super strong set of internal controls and inventorying system for these bikes as well. And they also had maintenance plans. They also had maintenance support planned out for it. They had a local bike shop that had donated their time and parts to help maintain this bicycle fleet. And it was basically the exact size of the fleet that they needed. They only had like 60, 70 kids, and they brought 50 bikes, 40 bikes, something like that. So it checked all those boxes, but it took some extra work. And we got all this information. We saw it had a lot of potential, but this was kind of a new thing for us. We had never seen anybody try and push it this far. So we passed it on to US Ed back when they had really responsive folks in the office, and they greenlit it within a couple of days. They're like, "This is fantastic. I love the creativity. We love the support. They provided all the evidence you could possibly ask for. It's allowable." So kind of illustrates the point we're trying to make of, you can do something that sounds a little goofy at first glance, but if you do all the underlying work to address each of those four contentions, this is reasonable, this is necessary, this is allocable to the purpose of the grant, and it's supplemental, then you can do some fun stuff as long as it doesn't fall into the category of any of the items for personal use. And they made it clear it wasn't for personal use because they had this super strong set of internal controls already in place. So that's the kind of like the top end of what could be possible for you.
So our next example is always one of my favorites. I love field trips. Actually, I do love to go on field trips, but anyway, so this is a field trip that was submitted under Title 4A, and in the GRA, it was claimed a field trip to Lagoon Water Park for STEM Day. And in the CFSGA, there was written transportation and entrance fees for students to participate in a STEAM field trip. So up on the screen is the purpose of Title 4A. And then just thinking about the information that we have at this point as you're just thinking about it, is it allowable? Is it unallowable? Do we need more information? Is it reasonable? Is it necessary? And if you could go ahead 2 slides, I think. So what happened with this one is, at its first glance, it was deemed unallowable. And the LEA actually did reply back and say, "Hey, wait a second." And so we got more information from them. And with the additional information that we received, it actually turned out to be an allowable item. But the amount of work that this LEA had to do on the back end could have been mitigated by putting it in the CFSGA in the first place, so that that coordinator could review it and approve it and ask questions before the money was even spent for this field trip. But what the LEA did is they said, actually, Utah State University sponsors a physics day at Lagoon. And local schools and districts, even from Idaho, come and compete. And there's robotics competitions, there's physics competitions, and they are busy all day doing these competitions to try to earn scholarships. And so the LEA had to submit some lesson plans for this, showing the connection to what's being taught in the classroom. And then they also had to submit an agenda showing that there actually was very little time, if any, to go on rides for fun. And they said that the kids were busy all day long, and the goal was to try to win prizes and scholarships for the teachers and the students. So with that information, this was determined allowable, but it was a lot of back and forth with the LEA. And they had already spent the funds. And so we were trying to come to a common place with them to ensure that we could pay, like reimburse them these funds so they weren't out the funds. But what appeared to be unallowable was actually allowable. So.
And this one also does a great job at highlighting the realities of being a CFSGA approver as well, where on our end, it's not our goal to put barriers between you and your funding. We don't want to be between you and giving those services to these kids. And sometimes there's a temptation to be as accommodating as we possibly can, maybe even more so, where in the description for the CFSGA, all the district had was transportation and entrance fees for students to participate in a STEAM field trip. On the surface level, that seems like a really solid thing under Title IV. There's all kinds of potential to do something that's perfectly allowable and not questionable. It seems bulletproof on first glance. And when it pops up in the GRA that this is in a water park, that kind of confronts us with, well, should we have asked for more detail in the CFSGA? Should we have sent this CFSGA back for additional information so that we can be more comfortable when we're saying, hey, if field trips for STEAM purposes, that's not necessarily allowable. I need more information about going on there. So, and there's an open question about, is it reasonable for us to send it back just because you said, hey, we're going to do a STEAM field trip? And that sounds super safe. And then water park pops up. And this one ended up being okay, but then also, ties into that challenge as a GRA reviewer, where you see in the CFSGA that the coordinator went out of their way to approve, we're going to go on a STEAM field trip. Do I flag this STEAM field trip that's clearly in the CFSGA just because it sounds a little odd? So it complicates the conversation when some weird details like that come up. And when they're planning a STEAM field trip, when they wrote the CFSGA, they probably knew that this might be a water park. Including that in the CFSGA on the front end, given they knew it was a STEAM field trip already, would help us get more information on the front end and shorten this whole conversation, lessen the stress levels of everybody involved, and it keeps everything nice and clean. This was a fantastic example. So I include this example kind of as an illustration of the human side of what these programs actually are. A lot of the times, the students that are benefiting from these projects and these programs are really in a tough spot in life. And we work in education. We have a soft spot for these kids, and we want to help support them in any way we can. And we're confronted with some of the walls around us in terms of what we can do with this grant funding. I love to encourage as much care and support as we can give for these kids, but we are still held to a standard within each box that's each grant. So, for example, it's been a couple of years, but in a Title I-A school, a student had lost both of their parents in immediate succession as a result of the pandemic going on, and was having a really hard time. And within that school, it was a Title I-A school, they had a program in which a counselor would sit with these kids and support them through these really hard times. And as a part of that, the school had purchased a stuffed skunk as a part of their life stinks sometimes, but it's going to be okay type of program. And hearing the story of this kid and the love and care these teachers and these counselors and this principal had put in to help support this kid, it was confronting that, yes, this is an excellent thing that probably helps this kid quite a bit, but a stuffed animal is technically personal use. It's a gift. It kind of meets a couple of the standards within the grant that are universally unallowable. So it's a challenging conversation. Yes, I want you to do this. I want you to be able to help this kid, to support him in this really hard time, but we can't use these grant funds for it. And that's the wrong button. That's a consistent conversation where we can see the intent there and we can see that there is just love for these kids, but we're still held to that standard, and even with tears on their face, we have to make that call and say, "Hey, we love you done this, but we can't reimburse you for it." So I mean, as a GRA reviewer, Lord knows you've had a couple of those at your desk, right?
Yeah, so one that stands out, there are a few, but one that stands out is the propane tanks under the Title 1A homeless set aside. And with the homeless set aside, those are last resort funds. And they are meant to provide supports for the student to succeed at school. So things like tutoring or supplies or even clothing if they need clothing at school, or even if they need like glasses or a dentist appointment or something like that, or counseling. Those are all things that are allowable under the Title 1A homeless set aside, which is an academic grant. The propane tank is needed and it's necessary for the family because they were in a very cold location living in a trailer. But this grant, you can't provide that with this grant. It's not a housing accommodation grant or an improvement grant or anything like that. It's supports in the school for the student to help them succeed. And so unfortunately, those ones I like have to go on a walk after I say no to those because I know the impact of it. But yeah, so like propane tanks or window treatments or anything like that. I've seen those under the homeless set aside.
It's not a fun conversation, but we've got to keep these kids supported any way we can.
Yep.
And on that nice and cheerful note, it looks like we're running a little bit over time. So those with an extra arrangement, feel free to bail. It's been nice having you guys. We'll be getting through this next example relatively quickly, but this will be up in recording later after the fact, probably about 5-10 minutes more. So last example, we're going to be touching on stipends for administration. So this example is a CFSGA that includes a stipend for the business manager under Title 2A, and this is marked under the administration set aside for Title 2A. The purpose of Title 2A is to provide subgrants to LEAs to increase student achievement with state standards, improve quality and effectiveness of teachers, principals, and other school leaders, increase the number of teachers, principals, and other school leaders who are effective, and provide low-income and minority students greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. So in and of itself, it sounds like, okay, we're paying for a high quality student leader. So maybe we're going to do this and we're going to call it good. And the business manager is helping administer the program. So this tracks. Under the circumstances, we actually don't know enough information to say whether or not this is allowed or not. Under a circumstance where, kind of as we mentioned, if the business manager is just managing the CFSGA and GRA claims and supporting with AP and payroll and that sort of thing, then that is no longer administration of the program. That is just general business office support. Administration is very specific to supporting program activities. So administering Title II means like leading a professional development events or coordinating services or coordinating a trainer, actively affecting the goals of the grant in that way and not providing some broader support for the program at the top level. Providing that kind of support at the top level would be recovered via indirect cost collection, not administration. However, in a smaller district, it's not uncommon for a business manager to go out and double as a trainer or sit in on a classroom walkthrough or something along those lines where they are directly participating in grant activities. And under those circumstances, it is allowable. So if we see this by itself in the CFSGA, we don't have enough information offhand to say, yes, this is allowable or it's not allowable, because it could be either one, but we're not going to approve it without knowing which of the scenarios it is. So adding extra information about what the role is of this individual and what they're doing within the program may be something we send it back for, just because we'd love to sign off on it, but if we sign off on it and it comes out that it was just a CFSGA administration stipend, then that's not reasonable or necessary or allocable. So kind of wrapping that whole thing up, tying the legal side into the human side, we ask that CFSGA users and GRA users, I mean, some of your business managers, you're handling the GRA itself, your federal programs directors are the ones that are filling out the CFSGA itself. Please do everything you can within your power to paint us a picture within the CFSGA or the GRA or both whichever one you're responsible for or most directly can affect. Give us as much information about the program that you can that is reasonable. I mean, Lord knows we're all busy people, but the extra few words, extra bit of black on that page of white could help us out in making that call nice and easy. That yes, this is you're good to go. No, you need some more information on this one, but let us know what's going on. Show us what's going on in these classrooms. Show us the impact. Show us the goal. Show us the means and the end of what you're trying to do. I love that picture of Bob Ross because kind of gives you that warm and fuzzy. Yep, I'm gonna show these people exactly the great and the good that I'm doing in my schools that we know you're doing. We just have to be able to prove it out. So thank you folks for sitting through that guy with us. That's Michelle and I should have put my emails on there, but our contact information is going to be in the special education contacts as well as in the federal program contacts page. So, Rob, I'm going to pass it back off to you for you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your help there, Michelle and Austin. Thank you for going over that. And before we depart for the morning here, I did want to hand it over to Zane Cliver real quick to give us an update on the transportation side. Zane, can you go ahead and take it away, partner?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hey guys, I just wanted to give a quick clarification on the assessment fee invoice that you guys have received. There was one that was sent out a few days ago. Please ignore the initial one. The corrected one was sent out yesterday. And please, please, please go over that and make sure all your information is correct before you submit a check to us. We had a bunch of issues with when I merged the spreadsheet, so I just want to make sure everybody got invoiced correctly, and some of you even received 3 invoices. The most recent one is the one you should be using. If you didn't receive any, or you need clarification on where this goes or how to submit, please feel free to email me at zcliver@sde.idaho.gov. Awesome. Thanks, Rob.
All right. Thanks, folks. And from the department, we want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we will look forward to seeing you in January. Take it easy, folks, and hopefully you can take some time off. Be with your families. Thanks, everyone. Bye.